Good evening. I'm Karyn Daniels, and Dr. R. Hollenberg and I want to welcome you to this special poetry reading event, Healing Trauma Through Poetry. This evening, we gather to explore the power of poetry in healing trauma. Poetry has long been recognized as a powerful medium for expressing emotions and experiences that might be difficult to articulate in any other way. Through the art of poetry, we can express our deepest pain and our greatest joys, explore the complexities of our inner world, and connect to others in meaningful ways. We are honored to have with us two esteemed guests, Dr. Cornel West and Dr. Annahita Mahdavi West, who have made significant contributions to the fields of academia, social justice, and political activism. Dr. Mahdavi West's insight into the healing power of poetry and the role of the arts in promoting well-being and resilience are truly invaluable. Tonight, as we explore the theme of healing trauma through poetry, we hope that through these works, we can find solace, connection, and inspiration. We invite you to open your hearts and minds and allow the power of poetry to take you on a journey of healing and transformation.
Our first guest to speak is going to be Professor Teresa, who is a professor of English, director of the Marymount Institute for Faith, Culture, and the Arts, and editor and founder of the Marymount Institute Press. And Professor DeVrome was instrumental in helping bring this book into the world.
Thank you. And so happy to be here and this wonderful collection of poetry. In my spare time, when I teach at the university, I teach Shakespeare a lot. And I teach The Merchant of Venice a lot. And some people think it's a anti-Semitic play and some people don't. I think Shakespeare's mind was too big for it to be anti-Semitic. But he gave Shylock, who's called the Jew in the speech, the greatest speech in the play. And I've rewritten it for Annahita because I think it's about equality. And it's been used politically for the United States, for the Soviet Union, for South Africa, for Nigeria, for all kinds of places to talk about how we are equal. So I've rewritten it a little bit. Pache Shakespeare. I'm a sister of Iran. Have not a sister eyes, have not a sister hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as an Iranian man is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? We are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If an Iranian man wrongs an Iranian woman, what is her humility? Revenge. If an Iranian woman wrongs an Iranian man, what should his sufferings be? By example, why revenge? The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. Annahita Mahdavi West's tender and splendid poems do not advocate revenge, but bear witness to the women of Iran who are equal to the men of Iran, the red poppies, the symbol of their resilience and lasting rejuvenation.
Beautiful healing words of Annahita Mahdavi West, poet of the Iranian diaspora, allow us to glimpse hope and justice, even when the realities of our world only seem to offer pain and despair. This inspiring collection of poems creates bridges out of borders and lets us know what it might feel like to be a citizen of the world. That's from the end of the Davis. Annahita Mahdavi West has penned a beautifully crafted collection of poems suffused with the sorrow of the author in exile and rendered in a language that is irresistibly haunting. Mourning Iran's land of cypress trees, torn apart in the days of hate. Annahita Mahdavi West poignantly celebrates the enduring strength of the women who sing crimson songs of courage infinite. Dusty Relics is a deeply compelling work from an enormously talented major American poet, Henry Louis Gates Jr. When we encounter the defiant yet tender lines of such a poet, we know that the flower that was Persia will bloom again. Wole Soyinka.
And two more people. This is Shole Woke. Now more than ever, we need poetry, especially by Iranian women. Annahita Mahdavi West is deeply connected with her homeland, and her heartfelt poems soar the winds of freedom while yearning for the scent of Caspian. And these comments are by Gail Ronsky, who's sitting right here with us in the front, and recognize the beauty of Annahita's Professor West poetry, Mahdavi West. The poems in Annahita Mahdavi West debut collection burst forth on the page, telling us in language that is as powerful as it is beautiful about the life of an Iranian woman living in exile. She tells us that the dew never washed death away from her homeland. She writes of the strings of my sister's hair flying on the trees and of wounded wombs giving birth to mighty daughters. These poems bear witness to the lives of Iranian women at a time when that witness is sorely needed. Let her poetry turn this season of endings into a season of renewed awareness and hope.
It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Cornel West, affectionately known to many as Brother West. He is the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at Union Theology Seminary.
Well, first, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. I know I am thoroughly blessed to sit next to my magnificent wife and to read my foreword to her marvelous collection of poems. It was a little less than 7 years ago, I was invited to come to this consecrated institution where I first set eyes on Annahita. First had a chance to meet her. And I had little knowledge of what God had in store for me. I'm so very glad to be a part of it. I want to salute again our very dear sister, Professor Teresa DeVrome, for being not only the co-founder of the press that published this, but also executed in such a marvelous way. And then to have Professor R. Hollenberg on the one hand and Professor Karyn Daniels, this institution, to bring us together. There's only one Professor Annahita Mahdavi West, and I think the students know that. If you have been a justice scholar, just raise your hand. Raise your hand. Look at these magnificent ones. That's what I'm talking about. Let me proceed. Artists are the vanguard of our species. They authorize an alternative world through human imagination, empathy, and courage. They invite us to truthful and painful journeys from and through our traumas to intense dramas of resilience and resistance. All true poets wrestle with the wounds, scars, and bruises of death, dread, despair, and disappointment, alongside a mysterious joy in language and life. Annahita Mahdavi West is a true poet. For over 40 years, she has suffered, shuddered, and struggled with the diaspora trauma of being a refugee, wife, mother, professor in exile from her beloved Iran. Her magnificent mother, she really is a gem, and her father, Eddie, both poets, as well as her brilliant daughter, Nirvana, PhD student in English at UC Santa Barbara, has been wind at her back. Persians are a world historical people with a long and glorious heritage, but also a sad and treacherous history. The UK supported coup on August 19th, 1953, that overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, crushed a genuine democratic possibility that has led the shattered country down a bloody authoritarian road. The present Islamic Republic, with its fascist police and policies, may be on the brink of collapse. The heroic struggles of the women-led movement for life, women, and liberty flourishes against overwhelming odds. A new world could be in the making. Through poets like my beloved Annahita, militants for tenderness, extremists for sweetness, radicals for gentleness, and love warriors for freedom. This is what you find in these powerful and truthful poems of my beloved wife, a soulful voice rooted in the great tradition of Rumi and Hafiz, Nima Yushi, Farooq Farazad, Aman Shamlu, and Annahita Mahdavi, one of the great revolutionary poets of his generation, her never to be forgotten father. Professor Annahita Mahdavi West.
Well, first I want to thank everybody for taking time. I know everybody's schedule is pretty busy. Some people coming from long drives. I really appreciate the support. I appreciate my colleagues' support, Dr. Hollenberg, Professor Daniels. And the support is not necessarily just for the book. They have been supportive friends for a long time, and that friendship and that sisterhood by itself is very healing. So I appreciate that. I'd like to thank you. And thank you for everyone that is here again. If I don't say your names one by one, just you know that I appreciate your presence here, and thank you to my beloved husband that was actually instrumental in encouraging me to publish the poet, my poems. And it all happened with a conversation that Cornel and Teresa and Gail and I were having, and then just disclosing that I'm writing, Teresa saying, just send it to me within a 7 month or so I had a book. But I have had a lot of these that I have in the book are actually date back to decades. So I never thought that I'm going to publish anything. One, because everybody writes poetry in Iran. All Iranians are poets. And I was thinking, why should I publish? And another one is that we can talk about it more. That poetry is so intimate. And it's just something that comes from your inside, and sharing it with the world puts you in a vulnerable place. But then obviously, you want to have the courage in taking that vulnerability. But, I decided finally that, okay, I'll publish one. So I'm going to read the very first one in the book, and then I will read a few of them, and we can discuss as I read. The title of this is Words. My words are painted with the crimson white tulips. My words from a dry, dusty desert. I speak of thirst, of the river running through the mirage, the fish covered in red scales. At the deep bottom of the sea, hear me. I speak of the snow that blankets the mountaintop, of thousands of years of yearning to fly. Hear my words, no volume, no space, floating in eternity, words of nothing, words of all things, like the red tulips, the color of blood, like the red scale fish, the color of heart, like the sun shining from the depths of the boiling volcano that will give birth to ashes. Hear me, I speak of the memory of once a dancing flame. Should I continue? Okay.
Yes.
If you want to. I mean, I can read another one. And we can talk about it. I'm here to do whatever you want. Okay, read another. I'm trying to see if I can run away from it. All right. So obviously, when I was living in Iran, there was a war, a long years of war, 8 years, 9 years, I think, very isolated war. Lots of destruction. So that kind of goes back to those ages. And the title of the book is City of War. I was born in the city of war, in the days of hate. If you want to find me, come to my little house that is built on nothing. Come at the loneliness o'clock. In my dried garden, only scarecrows smile. In my city, kids play with wooden guns and grown-ups with real tanks. Here in this city, only ashes are alive, and nobody brings news from the flames of love. It all ends by carving the names on the black stones, and again begins with the sound of another explosion. Alas, I was born in the city of war, in the days of hate, in the season of dried crimson meadows. I continue? You want to say about it?
Sure, question.
But do you want to take question? No, if you want to. No, I'm fine with it, yeah. Go ahead, John.
Thank you for this experience.
So hold on a second.
I was gonna come out with that.
There's some services that we're providing for.
Thank you for providing this service, for sharing with us. My question, my name is John Wimberly, I'm former student, former Justice Scholars, vice president. I thought about how we read the City of War, the reason for the war from a biblical perspective, historically, why those two countries are warring each other, how far it goes back. Was any of that involved in you actually writing the poem, or did you think about any of that while you were doing it?
So that's a really good question. First of all, I have to say that when I talk about vulnerability, I've been teaching here since 2015. I've never shared my life story with my students, so they're hearing it for the first time. So that's the vulnerability that I talk about, sharing, disclosing and all of that. But this is in a different capacity. I'm not in classroom. So that's really interesting you're asking that, because I remember when I was about maybe 8 or 9, we were living in a town that was very close to regions of Kurdistan, and there was a proxy, there was a Cold War always between Iran and Iraq. And I remember some tensions would arise. I remember exactly around that age, but that was not necessarily in my mind when I wrote this. This was pretty much back to Iran and Iraq war in the 1980s, because it was a horrible event. The destruction was just unbelievable. There was not, the country just went through a revolution, so the resources were not there. And the country was isolated by the outside world, while Saddam was being supported by America and UK, and even Sweden was giving weapons to Saddam. But I remember, being home with mom and my older sister, and dad would be traveling or at home, and the sirens would go off in this complete blackouts, and you have to run to shelters. And just the scene was overwhelmingly hopeless, because that's what trauma is. We study that trauma is something that it's pretty much an event that none of your human ability has control of. It's just happening to you, and you just have to find ways to survive it. And those are traumatic days. But when we talk about trauma, healing trauma through poetry, is that as we discuss in our classes, writing by itself is so healing. And when you are in a society that there is no resources, there's nothing available to you to go and talk and maybe share that insight that you were talking about, putting it on a paper becomes a matter of almost self-care. And, sharing it, putting your ideas on the paper, emptying yourself. It was very helpful for me, but it goes back to those times of, in Iraq War in 1980. I continue? Please. Okay. Oops, sorry. So the title of this one is The Ones That Won't Be Back, and this was I wrote this because of the death of a friend, and it was a trigger, again, a very traumatic event, but then there were many friends that were disappearing and in prison and dead. So this is basically literally for the ones that won't be back. Sounds come with the burning wind in these thirsty fields. The fire inside Earth's womb fears the birth of ashes. This is the season of endings. The seeds trundled and collapsed, and the flowers got lost in a dream. The wind took the news of flowers that begin at the end. No blooms, not here, not in the season of ends. The dust spreads its bed. I saw eternity when those who seek a calm and patient embrace cuddled with the dust deep under. Beyond the far twinkles of time, the dough never washed the death away. I see faces in frames dressing the tombstones, the spoiled smiles behind the haze of time. There at nothing. The tears won't wash the dust of death. Still, the burning winds bring the news of the flowers blooming under the dust, when times end and when times begin. Sure.
So. And when you write the poems, you talk about the healing aspect and the, I don't know if I'm using the right words, letting go of some of it. But you would address that, but also what does it do to then come back and revisit them? Yeah, I'm shaking inside. That's how it feels when you come back and visit them, because I actually remembering the pictures, it's like a Polaroid, it's there, the face that I'm talking about, the people that I'm talking about. So it's, you address your traumas and you learn how to not to become very reactionary and understand, you can never letting go. There are certain words that are kind of, are used a lot, even the word healing. It's not necessarily about letting go of anything, because things that are staying with you, how are you going to let go? It's the healing is in the impact of trauma, not the event. The events are there. You can't erase them. You can erase history, you can erase your memories, but the way that they impact you changes. So, trauma can make you an angry person, confrontational, no patience, and avoiding all of that. And you got to work and work and work through it to be that well-balanced person. That doesn't mean you don't remember anymore. And that doesn't mean that you have erased those events. But
yeah, when I read them and I remember where I was, or when I remember the faces, the phrase that I say, I see that they go and they're cuddled with dust. It's literally witnessing their burials. And the burials in Iran are very dramatic. It's not very, I don't know how it is now. I haven't been back for 40 years. But it's not very subtle and it's not very quiet. It's very traumatic, right? And so I remember that. And, but it was at the same time, that's what trauma does to you, that you're standing there and you're standing in the middle of a chaotic society with no hope. And you see these people being buried, and you think that is actually peace. That's very peaceful. So it's a very, well, I don't want to say bipolar. It's a two poles of emotions that you're experiencing. One is, that sadness and sorrow, horrible feelings of the loved one being buried, and the other one is, well, isn't that peaceful? Because, here you are, a young person or surrounded by young people that you're thinking, well, is that all there is of our future? And then maybe that's not bad. Maybe that's more peaceful than being here and struggling. Just recently, we all know with the life freedom movement, when they asked these young, courageous people, I don't have, even back then, I don't think we had the courage to do what they're doing now, going to the streets, knowing they will not come back. They said that, what do we have?
When I get clear with these,
Not
I
living.
understand what I'm get it like in the moment. Thing is, like, some of these old attitudes are gonna show up.
Oh, no, he muted it. That's fine. So, anyways, I hope I answered your question. Yes, yeah, okay. All right, let's see which one should I. Choose mine. Which ones are they? Ones I want. Okay, I'm gonna read the one Exile. Title is Exile. There was no return in the Sparrows' day camp. There was no path left to return, not even the thought of it. Behind the trellis in the garden, a little red tulip bloomed. The gardener never saw it. And she was given to the hands of forgotten. She dreamt of rain, and the howling of wind brought the news of nothing. And no gardener ever looked behind the trellis. And the little red tulip was given to the winds of forgotten, and the little sparrow took her memory to the forgotten city. I wrote this in a bus when I was leaving Iran in 1985. But when my dad came to visit me in Turkey, I showed him, the Farsi version of it. Some of these pieces were written originally in Farsi, I translated them, and some of them were originally in English. And I have a little notebook, kind of old now, and of decades. And he wrote something there with his own handwriting that this is true poetry. It's beautiful. I hope you publish it. And I decided to put that in the book as dedicating it to him, this piece. I have the Farsi version of it here in the back, obviously for those who read Farsi.
You should read it.
Thank you.
Yeah. That beautiful language, just moving groove.
It's for me and Ella Hejun.
I
Oh, I'm John is here. I didn't see you.
I've never heard you speak anything but English, so
I know.
it's the treat there.
All right, so this is actually the Farsi version for Exile. In Farsi, it's called Kuch. در کوچه آن پرستوک راهی دگر نمانده بود و نه اندیشیدن به بازگشت. در پشت آلاچیق عقاقیا گلی رویده که به فراموشی سپرده شده. باغبان که هر روز به باغچه آب میداد گل را ندید و عقاقیا به باران میاندیشید. در وحشت باد صدایی بود که خبر از هیچ میداد و هیچ باغبانی به پشت آلاچیق نگاه نکرد و عقاقیا در دست باد فراموش شد و پرستویی که کوچ میکرد یاد او را به شهر فراموشی برد. Yes, please. I like questions more than doing my own.
So you talked earlier about images, right? There are images that come up when you read this again. So could you talk about the differences in the images, or if there are any, when you're reading in Farsi versus English?
In my memory? Yeah, so memories, memories don't have language. Memories and pictures are pictures. But what, if you're asking if I think Farsi or English, is that what you're asking?
No, more. So we're using the mics for.
Leave it to a philosopher to ask hard questions. Maybe.
You two should be in a discussion. Understood your question.
I don't.
So for people who speak more than one language, it's not just a mathematical move from one language to another. There's a different story in some ways almost. And so I guess I'm asking is the story different? How is it slightly different or mildly different from the poem in Farsi versus the
Oh,
poem
you mean
in English?
when I translated?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that question was asked before. That's a really wonderful question. So, when you translate, you definitely lose a portion of a culture. That is very critical. It's a cultural concept that is it's a cultural concept that is very much touchable because it's experienced where you live, when you're from. So definitely in transition, something gets lost. So when I translate, I have to make sure that I translate in a way that people don't go ask, so what does this mean? Where is this place, right? And so the Farsi versions sometimes are longer than English versions because I have to somehow cut it. But the beauty of poetry, in my opinion, is that, we read poetry from different languages. We have a famous poet and they're from maybe South America and their poetry is translated in 10, 12, 20 languages. And you still feel it. You read it and you go, this is me. I see what they're saying. So while it's a global language that people can feel it and people can relate to it, when you read it in their actual mother language, it has a lot of cultural connotation that is probably not understandable by us. So some things get lost in transition. Some cultural components get lost in transition.
Were most of your poems written in Farsi and then you translated, or is it a combination of you wrote in Farsi, you translated to American English, and then you also wrote in American English, yes?
Yes. So it's really interesting that since I would say in about 1994 or so, I find myself comfortable actually writing in English. And then interesting things is that while I'm writing English, I'm thinking about a word in Farsi, but I'm writing in English. Then I go and find, the word but right now I would say that most of my writing is in English. And that's probably because I've lived outside of Iran more than I've lived inside of Iran. I don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing.
So if, when we read your poems, how will we know if this is Farsi translated? Or if it's.
It's a secret, you wouldn't know.
Can you tell the difference?
I can tell you that everything that I read so far was translated.
Is that right?
Everything I read so far, but I can read something that I,
So let me ask you, so you use a symbol of a sparrow, which for us is a little brown, little tiny brown bird
Right.
that lives everywhere. Is this a sparrow for you in Iran when you're thinking about the sparrow as a symbol? Do you have that same picture in your head that I have in
yeah,
mind?
that's the sparrow here. the
Yeah?
Little sparrow, yeah. So it's a little bird
Yeah,
that, be
flits about.
So this is actually something that I wrote in English and it's very recent. It actually has a lot to do, there are few pieces here that have a lot to do with the recent events in Iran. So I am going to read one of them. So this is probably maybe a couple of months ago. And it's called Dancing Hair. The river of blood runs through the veins of this land, the strings of my sister's hair flying on the trees, painting the frames of freedom's breeze, braiding the basket of dreams, roaring the sounds of freedom, wounded wombs giving birth to mighty daughters, the world falling at their screams, heads bowing down to their fears, crimson songs singing of courage infinite. We do not end, we rise like our mother's love everlasting, rainbow flags braided with our hair, soaring the wings of freedom, burning fires from the beginning of times, birthing phoenixes, never dying, never lost, rise and rise, just like our mother's love. This was all in English, it was written in English and now I'm gonna read one more and somebody said that talked about revenge. Yeah, I think you were saying that you don't write poetry. It's not revenge, it's not hate, it's not. Sometimes it's every all of that, and it's not all of that. I'm not a person about that's for hating and revenge. Obviously, even in the midst of chaos of Iran and how there's no due process and there's killings. I personally would like, if any time soon we have a democracy there, that all those people to be have due process. Right? We want to bring democracy. We no longer want to kill and hang. And so, but sometimes, especially for me, watching just these videos, all of us that we are here, we're watching these videos, and there's nothing we can do with the diaspora. The only thing we can do is to create events, voice out their issues. But I remember that I felt so angry, and as a mother, when I heard this or watched this video, perhaps my comrades Elijah and Afsan know which one I'm talking about, that they brought a news of this mother's son to the mother, that the news was that the son was hung, and she's in the streets, and the way she was screaming and screeching, my whole soul was shattering in 1,000 pieces. And I for a while couldn't watch anything. I had a hard time functioning. And so at that very moment I did feel angry, really angry. But then again, one of the ways for me of coping with everything that goes inside of me was writing, and that's what I write. So, and it's called Mother's Lamb. Be ready, Ahrimans, for the color of Mother Persia, with each anguished sigh, will hunt down the hoofs that roped her lamb. For the mother's curse will sentence your soulless necks, for the wails of mother breathed will chain you in internal dungeons, and mother's endless pained tears will flood your existence into the hollows of underworld. Be ready, offsprings of Moloch. The fire of mother's grieving heart will sentence you into eternal infernos. Those ropes you knot on the necks of these land's lambs will loop your frozen hearts to breathlessness. With every mother's alas in timeless echo chambers, be ready, hellish headsman. This also it's very relatable to many mothers in America that have lost sons to police brutality. We know that so many of them, those victims of police brutality, called their mothers at the end of while they were taking their last breath. So that's what I'm talking about, how it can be very the specific cultural things might get lost, but there's some components that everyone can, that's me, I feel that. You're so quiet.
Can I say something? Just, and anybody can come after the reading and get a free book, and I'm sure Annahita would sign, right?
If you want me to.
Well, if you don't want to sign, then you can just take a free book.
But first wanted to say that this marvelous pictures by a grand artist. His name is Brother Will Pupa, P-U-P-A. And he captured the poetic genius of my wife on canvas
In one weekend.
in one weekend. I don't know how he did it, but you would satisfied, right? Though?
Absolutely. When I looked at it and he said, he sent it to me and said, this is almost, maybe that's not the language, but rough draft. I could not take my eyes off because he captured everything that I would want to see in, if I was going to paint my poetry, that's what it would be. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful artist.
I was just gonna say something. You want to say it, my brother? You want to say? No, let me, I'll say a little bit, then we'll pass it on.
Absolutely.
I salute you, my brother. But no, I was just sitting here though, and I was thinking of how grim and bleak our situation is as a species at the moment. Escalating destruction of the planet. Escalating destruction of American democracy, escalating destruction of integrity, honesty, and decency in the culture. And how uplifting it is to still have poets around. As William Butler Yeats would put it, wrestle with the deep, dark corners of their own soul and transfigure it into words and sound that get us to wrestle. To most importantly, stay in contact with our humanity and all of our differences, all of our variety, diversity, and heterogeneity. We're really wrestling with what it means to be human in that very brief trek from mama's womb to tomb. We all share that in common. Death, dread, despair, disappointment. Wrestling with forms of dogma, forms of domination, and forms of death. And that's what you actually have in Dusty Relics. And that's why I'm both moved by it, but I'm also in some ways fighting a certain kind of melancholia because it looks as if, you know, in our day and in our culture, you have to cut so radically against the grain to imagine what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. What Shelley meant by poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. He was not just talking about versifiers. Annahita is a human being who uses language by means of imagination and empathy, get inside others and try to get us to be vulnerable enough to get inside of others, no matter what color, no matter what gender, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what nation, that deeper human level. And so in that sense, I'm deeply uplifted, but it's uplifted in a context in which you and I know how hard it is these days to not just talk that talk, but really walk that kind of walk. Really is. We live in some very spiritually decadent days. So much hatred and greed and indifference and callousness to other people's suffering. And it comes in all forms. And all of us are in some sense guilty of it. So it's not a matter of trying to zero in just on others. We all are complicitous in some sense because no one of us are pure. But in reading this poetry, you will have to sit back as I do. Say, or my own humanity needs serious re-examination in terms of the choices I made, the commitments I have, the connections I attempt to exercise toward and with others. So I think, definitely, I've always wondered what it is about the Persians that they would produce such towering poets in the history of the species. And it's a mystery in some ways, really is. It's a mystery. Like trying to understand why it is that in the most barbaric century of recorded time, which is the 20th century, 21st century may outdo it, we don't know, but 20th century, the most barbaric century of all recorded time, 150 million at least counted, killed, murdered, and so forth. But in the midst of that century, the greatest artistic breakthrough was jazz, Black music, that has disproportionately reshaped every musical, acoustic, and sonic site in the world. Now, that's not a function of skin pigmentation. Black folks didn't just come out the womb blowing the horn like Louis Armstrong. No, it's a mystery why it is the Irish hit the stage. Wow, Samuel Beckett, why it is that the Russians seized the novel, the way Tolstoy and Turgenev and Dostoevsky, Leskov, Chekhov, and novellas and plays. You see, why our Jewish brothers and sisters could take musical theater to a height one would have never known, from Hammerstein to Stephen Sondheim. We can go on and on and on. You see. And all cultures, all peoples, all civilizations have magnificent breakthroughs. But we're talking about certain ones that have a concentrated focus. And there's no doubt that Persians are a world historical people, especially when it comes to poetic form. The Persian novel, interesting. Nowhere close. Nowhere close.
No. And I wish I had an answer.
We wrestle with it.
Yeah,
Day in and
but I
day
don't
out.
know my,
I know my brother had a question. There's another brother in the back that has a question, and Professor Daniels. Now you have a question.
So I'm just asking us to pass.
Thank you once again. As you were reading the poem, the thought that formed in my mind is that, do you or are you still healing as you reread those poems?
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember in class, we talked about the word healing. I don't think healing is terminal. I don't really put emphasis on I'm healed. I think we want to do this. But that's it. I think it's.
No, but keep that thought though. Frank.
So healing is not terminal. I don't think people can say, I'm healed from my trauma. If somebody loses a loved one and they say, oh, I'm healed from it, I think something is definitely wrong. So healing is in coping everyday basis. How do you cope with it, with the trauma? Try to keep a balanced life, your physical health, emotional well-being, mental health. So in that regard, yes, it's constant. It's a process, but it gets worse, and it's almost like a re-traumatization when it repeats again. Just when we talk about the cycle of abuse, how it's repetitive and it doesn't. So, we are immigrants here. We ran away from political uproar and a barbaric regime. And yes, we live in diaspora. We enjoyed the opportunities we got in our host countries, for this case, America. But some of us, at least my dear friends that are here, Elahi and Afsane, first of all, we were all involved in activism back in Iran. And we come to America and we bring that with us. And thus we start looking and seeing the American society and its injustices, and we're not going to stay quiet. So we see the traumas here. We were all traumatized when we saw Brother George Floyd on TV. It's a re-traumatization. I personally find healing a process, and advocacy and activism and being at service and being outside of myself is something that helps me heal. Can I say that I'm healed from losing a lot of people? I'm healed from losing a country, a culture? No, that would be a lie. But I am not going to be a prison of my trauma. I'm going to be a prison of hope. I stole it from my husband. That's what he said. That's what he said. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thanks.
I think that, thank you for sharing your poems.
Thank you, Professor.
I think it means a lot to us who did not live your life. And you allow us one moment when you read your poem to enter into another dimension that we would not have otherwise ventured on our own, been able to go through. As a foreign immigrant in this country, I find that for many Americans, if we were to tell the truth about our lives as we know it, we would never be believable. We have to compromise, make it believable to them, so that the medium of language through which we have chosen as poets, we play with images and metaphors, like sparrows, like tulips, like colors, that they can hold on to as something tangible that comforts them. And it also comforts us. But the truth that I do when I write is I write two poems, one for myself and one I am willing to share with you. The other one is in my journal that I kind of share with my family members, and they know. And it is unbelievable to others. But we have a different yardstick and dimensions where we know without having to try to believe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Mahdavi West, I've wrestled with something for many, many years. And when I'm hearing you read the poetry, I'm thinking about the mothers. You spoke about the mothers. And I'm thinking about the wives, the women who are so strong. What I have a hard time wrestling with is the fact that
It's we women who bring them in. They suckle at our breasts. We raise them. Why then do they turn to oppress us? Have we not raised them to be honorable men, to be decent in the way that they treat others? And so I've wrestled with that question. I've had no one to ask. If my son, I've raised my son to be a decent human being, and I hope that I have no expectation that he would then turn to oppress women. And so I'm hoping you can enlighten me because I simply don't understand.
I'm gonna try, but after I answer, maybe you can also maybe come in, but I don't think are you okay? I don't think necessarily oppression has gender or the oppressor has a gender. Obviously, it's a very global concept that men assert power over women. The power and control is very global. It exists in all countries and all. So that's something that, you know, it's in the history of male dominant culture and society, some worse, some less. But I think the power and control goes beyond gender because, I mean, look at Margaret Thatcher. Look at all these queens that we had, you know, they oppressed and they killed and they colonialized. So I don't necessarily want to just say that it's men that oppress women. I think women oppress women as well, and women can oppress men. But yes, the majority of the world, the statistics are men that assert that power. Here in our country now, look what they're doing to women and to the women's rights. I think it's something in the core of human beings that is in love with power and control. And that, you know, you see yourself as somebody if you can control others and, you know, that power and that greed. I feel like it goes beyond gender. You know, and I know you're a beautiful mother. I know I've heard your story. You're a wonderful mother. I'm sure you raised a wonderful son too, but it's a kind of a hard question.
In the Iroquois culture of Quebec and northern New York, the women are the only ones who may declare war. So in the Iroquois culture, women are the ones who give birth to children, they carry them to term, they deliver them. And so they're the only ones who can say, yes, this is worth fighting for. Now, what happens with people is, you know, they don't always follow even their own cultural norms. But that is one culture that I know of. And I think they got it right. Because it's, even now, like, you know, women go to war, women want to carry weapons. Many of the women in our culture who want this Second Amendment to be written in gold, they're women. And they're carrying weapons, so I agree with you, Annahita. It's not just a gender issue, it's a human nature issue that we have to fight. It is not natural for us, I guess, to be kind and loving. We have to learn it. And sometimes we learn things and then we say, forget that. I'm going to go my way.
Say a quick word on it. I mean, one, I think we are simply a wretched species.
No, we're not.
Oh, look at our historical record from the caves to where we are now. The histories of wars, of hatred, of organized greed, of institutionalized indifference toward the vulnerable. That's every moment of the species. There's never been one moment in the history of the species that God would say in history that's thoroughly good. Not one. Now, we're also a wonderful species. We have the capacity, when we have the courage, the compassion, the vision, the education, not in the formal sense, because highly educated folk have done a lot of damage to people. Deep damage. I'm talking about education in the profound sense of transforming a wretchedness into wonderful ways of relating to people that connect with joy and love and uplift and community and conviviality and so forth. That's why the arts are so crucial, because the arts always remind us of love, compassion, and joy in the midst of all the hatred, greed, fear, insecurity, anxiety, and just downright indifference to people. So I think at that point, it is a matter of human nature, human condition, but it's changing all the time. Come up with new ways, breakthroughs, we come up with setbacks. And so when we have that kind of honest and candid reading, it means that we're never surprised by evil or paralyzed by despair. Never. We're the only species, as Dostoevsky says, that have find gratuitous pleasure in cruelty. See, lions and tigers, let alone our beloved elephants, don't do that. They're hungry, they eat, they kill, they get full, it's over. We get gratuitous pleasure in cruelty, torture. It's not just ruling classes that do that to poor people. People do it to each other and so forth and so on. You see, that's wretched. That really is. That's miserable. But thank God, that's not the only story about the species. That's not the last word. That's the crucial thing. I think.
I don't know if we're wrapping up, but I was wondering if you'd have advice to anyone who also wanted to use poetry or writing for healing. You know, how could they get started?
So in the field of psychology, we do have poetry therapy. We actually encourage people that seek help to write. And one of the biggest things that we do in the clinical world is asking people to journal, write every day, write about your emotions, write about your thoughts. So while maybe not everybody writes poetry, but writing about what you feel is very therapeutic. I'm very cautious about using the word healing because again, it's a process, but for the sake of this event, yes, when you write about your feelings, for example, all the feelings that you are feeling inside about the power and the mothers that raise men and sons and how sons become the ones that are oppressing, you can actually write a nice piece on that, right?
Yeah.
And it's very healing even if you don't do anything with it. Like Professor said that sometimes I read for myself, sometimes I read for others. So yeah, my suggestion would be, or recommendation is that keep writing about what you feel. If it's, we're usually not aware of our feelings, we're aware of our reactions, we react constantly. But if we can pause, that's a process of healing, that you can pause and be aware of what you're feeling, because it's very normal to feel sad and anxious and angry and depressed. It's normal. There's nothing wrong with that feeling. I mean, look at our world. Look what's happening around us. So there's nothing wrong with having anxieties and depression and sadness and worries. And even if you're finding joy in anything, these are our feelings and they're valid and you can write about them. They might not be facts, right? Feelings aren't facts, but they're feelings that they're being processed inside you and you can write about them. And the incredible thing is that you feel lighter when you put it on paper because it doesn't weigh on you anymore. Even if you write down that today was a horrible day, I hate my boss, things like that. It's something that is not even a matter of a poetry, but you want to put it on the paper. So yeah, my suggestion would be keep writing and put your feelings down on the paper, you can always come back and add some symbols to it and maybe change it to a better a piece if you want. If not, just keep it for your therapeutic, as a therapeutic tool. Yeah.
They got to.
So on that topic of healing trauma, I was wondering if you kind of have a safety net set up before you go about this. I know you talked about having a clinical therapist lead you through this. Would you say that it's, I guess, a matter of like choice to do it with a therapist versus doing it individually or with maybe peer support? Or do you think that there's, I guess, any danger in opening up those wounds and releasing them into writing? I also just wanted to say that you are so empathetic toward the suffering of everyone, and that is astounding coming from someone that's experienced what you've experienced. It means a lot, and it's really powerful. It just, yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay. So you were asking wonderful questions. There is a bit of a danger if you start processing the traumatic wounds that you had by yourself. Just like if you, if a human being has a deep cut, right, that needs stitches and has to be done by professionals, and you just put Band-Aids on it, it's very dangerous if you try to treat it. So my recommendation is for people who have experienced traumatic events, yes, to seek professional help. Professional help might not always be, favorable to you, but I always say that seeking therapists and psychologists should be like seeking a dentist. I have in my life changed 20 dentists, first of all, because I'm really scared of dentists. I keep thinking it's them, but you have the right to change your therapist, but yes, it's, you should be under a guidance. But writing doesn't necessarily mean that you're addressing a trauma or you are going to get re-traumatized. Writing is on everyday basis of, this is how I feel right now. We talk about in psychology about the emotional triangle. So just as simple as writing a triangle, and in one angle you put thoughts, in one angle you put emotions, and in one angle you put behavior. Usually, again, we are very aware of our behavior. You lash out, you're impulsive, or you're angry, or you're, just the awareness of, wait a minute, where does this come from? And, put this triangle together. But I do agree that it has to be guided. If people have traumas, it has to be guided. And writing should just be a form of you emptying yourself, not necessarily treating yourself. But for me, it has always been, being at service. It's, I work with refugees, or, when I got hired as a tenure professor, I create, with my wonderful students, we founded and formed Justice Scholars. That's healing. When you're outside of yourself, it's healing. When you give service, it's healing. That doesn't mean you don't deserve self-care. You do. But the more we are inside of ourselves, the worse it gets. I hope I answered.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have a real practical question. You have said so many amazing things, and I didn't bring a notebook, So I'm wondering, this is being recorded, right? Will we be able to access this?
Yes, and if you would use the mic, then.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm just asking if we'll be able to access this because I want to hear Annahita say these things again. And I mean, I have the book so I can read the poems again, but you just said such amazing things. I want to know if I can, if this can be sent to me or something.
Sure.
Okay.
You can also come to my office. We can have one-on-ones.
Let's do that.
Definitely. I think it's recording. I don't know. I'm hopefully.
They said it was.
Yeah, we did push recording. I think he's saying it is being recorded.
Yes, I think it's recorded and I don't know, but I can work with the technical people to try to get a link and then I'll talk to you about.
Yeah,
if
I
you
think
want.
the link is going to be in my phone because it's in my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope I can send it to you, Gail.
Okay, I'd love it.
Did you want to take more questions or do you want to read one last one and wrap
I
up?
can read one last poem and wrap up if there are no questions, because I know we have food out there and I'm sure people want to take pictures with Cornel. I think I'm gonna read end with a more kind of like uplifting poem. This is I wrote this for my daughter when she was born, and well, no, she was older when I wrote this, maybe a year or so. It's not when she was actually born, but I worked on it through the years, and that's also been written in English originally. So I'm going to end with something that is more uplifting. I think it is more uplifting, I hope so. So the name of the piece is Daughter Child. I heard your heartbeat. Did you hear mine? Your mere existence blessing my soul. Do I deserve you? Did I have your consent to bring you to the jungle? There is a land far away, not in fairy tales. We have no land. No one ever did. What bliss in landlessness. Our eyes gaze deep as an endless night. I have seen your eyes 1,000 years. This joy you bring, a sublime being, is of divine. We have been here before. Do you remember me? The ancestors called you from the land of lionessness, from the land of lioness, land of cypress trees spearing skies, and of golden songs and poets. Land of woman never silence. What divine joy, what divine joy, what sublime being, what nirvana, daughter child, the ancestors are calling. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here again. I really appreciate your time, and it means a lot to have this support. I was just writing, never thought that I would, have a book, let alone all these events. Thank you, Teresa, for your amazing support. Thank you, Gail, for your support, and
Come and get a book.
thank you.
Wonderful writer, science.
Thank you. Thank you to my students, to wonderful colleagues I see here, to my wonderful comrades, Eli June and Afghan June, two women that I look up to, role models in our community, leaders in our communities for freedom movement and feminist movement. And it's an honor to have all of you here. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so.
Outside.
So what? I don't know.
I did, my host.
Have you been there lately? No. Did I steal your pen?